Hey everyone, welcome back. We are diving right into AI today, specifically ChatGPT. You know that wild new update they just dropped? It seems like AI voices are everywhere these days.
Yeah, it's definitely been getting a lot of attention.
And for good reason, right. But we're not just here to talk about the hype. We want to know what it's actually like to use this thing. So OpenAI's advanced voice mode for ChatGPT, that's what we're looking at today.
And it really is more than just a gimmick. It represents a pretty big shift in how we interact with AI.
So let's just dive right in, shall we? What do we need to know?
Well, for starters, you're right. This isn't something everyone has access to just yet. You'll need to be a paid subscriber. So that's Plus, Team, or Enterprise accounts.
Right, so not the free version, got it.
Yeah.
I think it's important to clarify that right off the bat.
Definitely. As of today, September 27th, the rollout is happening, but kind of in phases, so some of you listening might already have it. OpenAI has said it's not available everywhere just yet, though.
That's right, not in the EU, the UK, a few other spots.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's listening who does have it, I gotta say, it seems like they really tried to make it user-friendly. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, they've done a good job of making it pretty intuitive.
Just an app update and boom, there it was. A clearly marked button. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing when it's easy to find.
Makes a big difference.
Oh, and I love that little sound cue. When you switch modes, it's like this little bump sound, and then the animation changes too.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that.
It just signals that shift so nicely, you know?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're in a different space now. As someone who thinks about how to talk about this stuff all the time, I appreciate those cues. But okay, enough about the little things. What is it actually like to use? I took it for a spin, tried out some of the things the articles were
Well, I
suggesting.
bet. What kind of things did you try?
I had it tell me a bedtime story, which was weirdly soothing, not gonna lie.
A bedtime story, huh?
Don't judge. I also did some mock interview prep with it, and I even tried out a little Spanish practice. It was really interesting to see how it responded.
And this is where it goes beyond just your typical text-to-speech,
Yeah.
right? Because it's picking up on your pacing, your pauses. It's almost like it's listening to what's between the words, not just the words themselves.
That's a great way to put it. It did feel a lot more natural than other AI voices I've played around with. Not perfect, of course. There's that daily time limit for the advanced voice mode,
Right. About 30 minutes or so, then it switches back.
which makes sense when you think about how much processing power this must take.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly resource intensive, even for a company like OpenAI. I'm sure we'll see those limits change as the tech gets even better. That's my prediction anyway.
Fingers crossed.
Mhm.
Another thing I noticed, and this might seem a little nitpicky, but once you're in the advanced voice mode,
Mhm.
you're kind of stuck there, you know?
Oh, interesting. How so?
You can't switch back to just text or the standard voice in the middle of a chat. You have to start a whole new chat if you want to do that.
Yeah. Huh. That's good to know. I wonder if that will always be the case or if they'll make it more flexible down the line. It's still early days, after all.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about what it's like to use, the basics of how it works. But there's one more thing we have to address here, and I think it's something a lot of listeners are probably wondering about as well. Privacy. I mean, it's cool and all, but are we basically just handing over recordings of our voices now? It makes you think.
Ooh, for sure. It's something to consider. The article really dug into it, probably more than we have time for here. But yeah, it's different from how the old text-based version worked.
So it's not just like recording us to make the conversation smoother.
Well, it's a little more than that. The audio from your voice chats, they're storing that with your chat history now. Before, it just transcribed it and then got rid of the recording.
Interesting. So they're holding on to it. I'm guessing there's a reason for that.
Right. I mean, one reason is so you can go back and actually listen to those conversations. Like, think about referring back to a meeting recording. That's kind of like that.
Makes sense. But I have a feeling that's not the only reason.
You're right. The article says OpenAI is letting users share their audio to train the AI models, completely separate from the text data they've been using.
So it's optional. I guess on the one hand, more data, smarter AI, right?
Yeah.
But then again, voice recordings just feel so much more personal than text.
Yeah, it's a good point. This whole data privacy thing, especially with AI, it's something everyone needs to think about. OpenAI talks about anonymizing the data, but I get why people might be hesitant.
For sure, this is new territory. It's like, do we want a crazy realistic AI, even if it means giving up more privacy?
It's a trade-off. And honestly, we're going to keep seeing this debate more and more as this tech gets better. The big thing for listeners is be informed and make your own choice. Go read the article, get the full picture.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the tech side, the experience, and the privacy stuff. But it still feels like we're just scratching the surface. This isn't just a small update. It feels like a much bigger shift is happening. It's kind of wild when you think about it. Like, What if we're all just casually chatting away to AI, getting advice, brainstorming? It's not sci-fi anymore.
It really isn't. I mean, will this be the new normal? Will we all be walking around talking to our phones? Like, it's totally fine.
Part of me kind of loves that idea, although I'm sure some people would be horrified.
People love to be horrified by new technology. But speaking of being horrified, the article did bring up some downsides, things to think about.
We have to. What did they highlight that we haven't really touched on yet?
It's all about context, like digging a little deeper. And here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit concerning. As these AI voices get more and more realistic, we need to be aware of how they might be misused.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Misused how? Give me an example.
Imagine a really good AI voice, like scarily good, and someone uses it to sound exactly like another person.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Think about scams or spreading misinformation, or even just impersonating someone without their consent. That's the kind of thing we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, the article mentioned that, but it did feel like a bit of an afterthought, They're so focused on the tech that it's easy to forget about the potential consequences.
Exactly. And that's why it's good to have these conversations. It's not just about, oh, shiny new tech. It's about how this stuff impacts the real world. It affects individuals. It affects society as a whole.
I am definitely more aware now than I was before we started talking, and maybe a little concerned, if I'm being totally honest.
That's the thing about being on the cutting edge, right? It's exciting, but there's always that little bit of, wait, are we sure we should be doing this?
For sure. So, for anyone listening, go ahead, play around with the new ChatGPT voice if you have it. But remember, while you're doing that, keep those bigger questions in mind. With every step toward AI feeling more human, more real, we have to ask ourselves, what lines are we not willing to cross? What are the boundaries here? This is a conversation that's just getting started, and it's an important one.
It really is. And that's what we're here for, to explore these ideas, to keep asking the tough questions. So OpenAI's ChatGPT is making waves again. And this time, it's not just about the text, right? It's about ChatGPT finding its voice, literally. We're diving into the big world of AI voice features and all the excitement or maybe apprehension surrounding OpenAI's latest move.
It's definitely a huge leap. Giving ChatGPT a voice, and not just any voice, the ability to mimic accents, tones, you name it. It's really fascinating, and frankly, it takes us much closer to, that natural interaction we crave with AI.
Right. Like, remember the robotic monotone voices of those early virtual assistants?
Oh, yeah.
This is a whole other ball game now.
Light years ahead.
Totally. And it's like everyone's talking about it. In fact, we've got some insights from AI enthusiast Matt Wolf over at the AI Advantage. He's got this whole YouTube video and transcript about it. He even found a workaround for European users because apparently they couldn't access the voice feature initially. Something to do with VPNs, but that's a deep dive for another time, maybe. But what's got people really buzzing is how ChatGPT nails accents. Like, imagine asking it to tell you a bedtime story in a Scottish accent.
Well, it's more than just mimicking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the tech behind it is incredible. ChatGPT isn't just pulling from pre-recorded voice samples, it's actually generating those speech patterns on the fly,
Wow, that's impressive.
adapting to different accents and inflections in real time.
So it's not just mimicking, it's like actually understanding the nuances of how we speak. Okay, so it can do a Scottish brogue, no problem. Matt even got it to do a pretty good impression of his own accent, which I have to admit is pretty impressive. But, and there's always a but, right? OpenAI has put some guardrails in place.
Yeah, some limitations for sure. For example, sound effects are still off limits. You can't ask it to mimic a crashing wave or a screaming eagle, at least not yet.
Which makes you wonder why those specific limitations. Is OpenAI just playing it safe? I mean, new tech, lots of unknowns, maybe preventing misuse, or is it something else? Are they strategically holding back some of ChatGPT's true capabilities? I mean, is this all we're going to get? Or are we just seeing a carefully curated preview of what this voice tech can really do?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure anyone has the answer yet. OpenAI has definitely been vocal about their focus on safety concerns and responsible AI development, remember. So these guardrails could be their way of mitigating potential risks.
Makes sense.
But you're right, it also highlights that tension that always seems to come with cutting-edge technology.
The push and pull between pushing boundaries and making sure things don't go completely off the rails.
Exactly.
It is interesting, though, right? It's not like they're just letting ChatGPT run wild with voice. They've got those custom instructions. Remember, Matt mentioned those.
Oh, yeah.
It lets you tailor the AI's responses, almost like acknowledging that this tech needs personalized control,
Absolutely. And that personalization, being able to customize and adapt the AI to individual needs and preferences, it hints at a future where AI isn't just this one-size-fits-all solution.
Which is amazing, but also kind of makes you wonder if they're already doing this with voice AI now, what's next?
Well, hold on. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, even with the limitations, what ChatGPT can do with voice right now is seriously impressive.
For sure. It's just, it's important to remember that OpenAI isn't the only player in the game.
Oh, absolutely not.
While they might be grabbing all the headlines right now, other giants like Google and Meta are also making some serious moves with voice AI.
Right, and their approaches are actually quite different from what OpenAI is doing.
And that's where things get really interesting. Matt specifically called out Meta's work with open source AI models. Their Llama models in particular, he seemed really excited about it.
And for good reason, honestly.
So for those of us who aren't fluent in AI jargon, let's break it down a bit. What does open source even mean in this context, and why should we care?
Think of it like a recipe, but instead of being kept secret, it's out there for anyone to use. Anyone can take it, modify it, even share their improvements. That's the beauty of open source.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
So in the case of Meta's Llama models, it means developers now have access to these like building blocks of really powerful AI. They can experiment, innovate, really tailor those models to specific tasks or industries.
So instead of waiting for like OpenAI to roll out a new feature or update, developers could just grab one of these open source models and kind of run with it.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
It's really about democratizing access to AI
Yeah.
and hopefully fostering a more collaborative and innovative environment.
Yeah, for sure.
This has the potential to really accelerate the development of voice AI applications in ways we probably haven't even imagined yet.
It's like the Wild West out there, but in a good way. Just this surge of creativity and experimentation.
Precisely. And it's a stark contrast to, well, we've already talked about OpenAI's approach.
Yeah.
Much more cautious. There's controlled releases, carefully implemented guardrails. Meta is basically saying, here are the tools, go build the future.
Both approaches have their pros and cons, obviously. OpenAI's concern for safety makes sense, especially with how powerful this AI stuff is becoming. But Meta's open source model, I don't know, it's just exciting. So many possibilities.
It really is. It'll be fascinating to see how this all unfolds.
Absolutely.
It's a tough balance, On the one hand, you've got the potential for crazy innovation with open source, but then you need to think about responsible development, the ethical considerations.
Right, because if things go wrong, they could go really wrong. And this actually ties into something Matt mentioned about how realistic these AI voices are becoming, like scarily realistic.
Yeah, he wasn't kidding.
He was talking about a future where we might not even be able to tell the difference between a human voice and an AI.
It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. This technology is advancing so rapidly,
Uh.
and it really makes you think, right? What
Right.
happens when those lines between human and AI become increasingly blurred?
Honestly, it kind of blows my mind. If an AI can sound exactly like me, with my accent, my tone, everything, what does that even mean for my own identity?
Big questions, right? It's interesting. Philosophers have been debating this for centuries. What does it mean to be human? What is consciousness? But AI is bringing these questions into a whole new light.
It really is mind-blowing when you stop and think about it. But let's bring it back down to earth for a sec. For our listeners out there who are like, okay, cool, but what does this actually mean for me? What are the practical takeaways here?
Right, because it can't all be philosophical debates, right?
Exactly.
Well, even at this early stage, this tech already has some really tangible uses. Matt was demonstrating how he uses ChatGPT's voice feature for brainstorming.
Oh, interesting.
Instead of just typing out his ideas, he's having this conversation with ChatGPT, back and forth, bouncing ideas off of it as if you were talking to, a colleague.
That's really cool, actually. I can see that being so helpful, especially for writers, entrepreneurs, anyone who needs to get those creative juices flowing.
Exactly. And because ChatGPT can do different voices, emotional tones, you can see the potential for things like language learning, even practicing public speaking.
Oh, that's a great idea. Or even, like, for fun. Imagine having ChatGPT read you a bedtime story in the voice of Morgan Freeman.
There you go. The possibilities really are pretty vast. And that's before we even consider what Meta's open source approach could bring. With all these developers out there now able to mess around with these models, improve them, I think we're on the verge of seeing a wave of new and innovative uses for this tech.
It's exciting, but also a little intimidating, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like we're on the edge of something massive, but we don't really know where it's all headed.
That's the thing about technological leaps, isn't it?
Yeah.
They challenge us to adapt, to rethink our relationship with the world. And in this case, maybe even our relationship with technology itself.
Which brings us back to that final thought for our listeners. This tech, it's moving fast. This isn't some far-off future we're talking about. It's here, it's now. So start thinking about what role you want voice AI to play in your life. What are you hoping for? What makes you nervous? Because the future of this isn't set in stone, you know? We're all shaping it together through the choices we make, the conversations we have.
Well said. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Because this is a conversation that needs everyone at the table.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, and we'll see you in the future of AI.